Buckle up, excellence junkies, because this podcast is definitely for you. Welcome to Rockafuel. Do you wish that you could surround yourself with people that love to kick ass just like you? Well, come to my party, baby, and meet some of the brightest stars in the entrepreneurial galaxy, because it is my mission to give these entrepreneurs a platform to declare what they are on this planet to accomplish and to show you why they are rocket fuel. And we're live. Hello, Rocket Fuel community. I hope you are having an amazing day. Today, I am so thrilled, happy to be able to bring to you an expert who is really dealing with a health crisis that we have today in our world. I mean, have you ever walked in to a family member's house or friend's house and recognized that their clutter has become a little more than clutter, right? You start to actually feel concerned as to how it may affect their life and their health. And so today we are going to be speaking to Tammi Moses. Tammi, thank you so much for joining us. She is a brilliant woman, but she is the Chief Encouragement Officer of the Hoarding Solution. And her mission is to help loved ones, friends, people who have loved ones in their families that are experiencing challenges with hoarding, and to supporting them in figuring out how to help the person in crisis. And so thank you so much, Tammi, for joining us. Tell me a little bit more about how did you even get involved in this discussion?
Well, I'd like to thank you for having me here today, and I'm really excited to talk about it and share more so that people know they aren't alone in dealing with this. And you know, I never set out thinking I'm going to talk about this issue, you know. It kind of evolved based on life experience and conversations I had with people who everywhere I went, when I mentioned what I was thinking of doing, they would say, oh, I know this, I experienced this myself, or I have an aunt or a relative, or, oh, I have a neighbor. And so it seemed like everyone had some kind of story relating to hoarding issues, but no one seemed to know, A, what hoarding actually was, you know, and B, how do you talk to people about it? How do you share your concern? And then if you're a person trying to manage this situation for someone else, how do you take care of yourself? How do you make sure your needs are met? Because a lot of times people don't realize the level of opposition you might receive when you go in to try to help someone who has a big clutter situation. And even if it's just beginning, you might get a lot of kickback from someone who doesn't actually think they have a problem.
Sure. I mean, so what's the difference? You know, what's the line that has to be crossed between clutter and hoarding?
Like, so there's like the official definitions of all these things, right?
Okay.
Which, you know, we kind of need that as a baseline for funding, for diagnosing situations. But a lot of people will have clutter. In fact, I'll say most of us have clutter somewhere. It's in a junk drawer. It's a closet.
Oh, yeah.
It might be the room. You know, it might be the garage. It might be that shed. Like, I would say most of us have some level of a clutter situation. But when it becomes so intense that it's taking over your kitchen and you can't cook because it's cluttered with all the takeout boxes or all the things you haven't tossed yet, when you start storing your clothes in your shower because your closet is overflowing or you can't access it, when you start sleeping with tons and tons of things on your bed, when you have a trip hazard in your house, you are really moving into something that's a health situation for you and for other people that might visit. And it can really curtail you from having relationships and having people in your home. And so it can be very isolating in many ways when it becomes extreme. And a lot of times, like, we might suspect someone has an issue, but we may not know for a while, and then you visit, or then you someone lets you see a little piece on a Zoom call, and you're like, huh,
Hmm.
wonder what's going on over here. And I'm concerned about this person. And so it's challenging to say, hey, I'm concerned about you, when you're not sure exactly if what you're seeing is real. And sometimes there's a discussion often about hoarding and squalor, and
Mm.
a lot of times people equate them as the same. But I have seen very clean situations where there are no animal issues, where there are, like,
Ah.
but I've also seen it where like, if you have pets that don't, like, if, say, a cat box isn't clean, a cat's going to go wherever it wants, right? And so
Mhm.
now you're looking at other issues besides just clutter. And so sometimes it's valuable to look at having that conversation about what is going on. Like, if you know someone has no pets, but you just see a lot of clutter, okay, you're probably safe to be able to just have that conversation. But if it's some kind of situation where they aren't throwing out things like food containers and the trash is piling up, like, you're looking at other issues going on there.
Mm.
Um,
So that's
so,
interesting. Yes. So you're kind of looking at this progression, right?
mhm,
Where it's one thing to say, "Hey, I'm cluttered, and I may not be able to walk out of this room clearly, or access a closet, or something like that." And it's interesting that you're almost saying, like, there's the clean hoarder, where like the issue of safety is really more about not being able to get out, or not being able to have people access you and such. And then there's the beyond, where it's evident that there's squalor, there's dirt, there's potential for infection, there's potential for rodents and all of that stuff. And so you're saying that for somebody to not change that situation, then it's kind of escalated.
right. And it's
Okay.
kind of there's a continuum where, someone might live in a pristine home, so no issues, no clutter, no anything. And then you might have someone that's kind of middle scale, where, yeah, there's a couple boxes and there's some totes that need to be sorted, and you know and often I would say it looks like you're moving, like, you know
Which I'm very sensitive to right now, because I just moved to my new house, so we're literally living amongst boxes, right?
right. And so you often can be in a place in your life where that is a normal situation for a period of time.
Hmm.
However, sometimes people move, and 10 years later they still look like they're moving in or moving out. And that's, to me, is kind of what hoarding ends up looking like when it takes over like a massive part of your house or your life. And some people will have very clean main spaces that you see, and then their things
Oh.
will be tucked away into other rooms with doors and things like that. So,
Mm.
but I also, some people say, don't have doors, but I'm also a fan of doors, because not everyone who comes over needs to see every piece of your house, right? Whether you have,
Right.
like, it's okay to have some privacy, even though you want people to come over or be social that way. But
Yeah.
um, anyway, some people really are like, oh, just don't even allow any zero clutter. And I'm like, I don't think that's realistic. I think most of us have
Right.
something we need to be dealing with.
Right, right. So what's interesting, I would love to share with the audience, how did you even come to learn about hoarding and managing hoarding and helping people through that process? Where'd the
Well, it was
story
kind
begin?
it was kind of a process for me to even learn that something like hoarding existed, because when I grew up in the 80s, we didn't really have a name or a term. It was just, hey, there's a lot of stuff here. Why don't you clean it up? Why don't you do something, to me as the kid? And I was like, well, I didn't make this mess, first of all. And second of all, there's always a lot of drama whenever I try to move things or clean things or do
So okay,
anything.
so this is your home and you were asked to kind of do something about the stuff.
Outside people would say, like,
Ah.
people or friends that I knew, like, why don't you fix this? And at 12 or 13, 14, like, it's one thing, like, my job was to wash dishes, right? And that was perfectly acceptable. But
Uh-huh.
doing other things, like to clear off a space or clear off a table, that caused issues. And I came across a picture recently where I had a Christmas tree and I plopped it up on top of, just the stuff that was there because I was determined to have a tree.
Right, right, right.
Um,
Oh, interesting.
so and then there were survival techniques that I had that I used, and I didn't really realize I was doing that. At the
Mhm.
time, we didn't have running water, like, so there was issues with that as a teenager. And one of my solutions was, well, I'm going to just be in swimming class, and so I took swimming as my PE because I could be have a shower, do all that normal stuff. I washed laundry at my grandma's house on Sundays after church. I figured out youth group was a safe place to go, so that's where I would spend my time, like, um
Mm.
and but that now I look at it and I'm like, wow, I was doing a lot of escaping things. I was doing whatever it took to navigate my way. And
Which makes sense when you're younger, you're not really empowered to make such
mhm,
drastic changes. And I think the difference, and I remember when we spoke, before this interview, um, the difference is that there's some sort of emotional connection to the things, which is
mhm,
why it makes it difficult and dramatic when you're trying to clear off the table for something or clear off the floor for the Christmas tree. All of a sudden it becomes this big dramatic thing because there's something behind the the mess. It's just not about things.
and that's why sometimes you end up having to do what is considered a forced clean out because situation is so extreme. But part of the reason that is so difficult is because of the attachment to the things, because a lot of people, like, catalog what's in their space, and so if you move it, they no longer know kind of where it is. If they move it, then they still know. But um
I completely understand that because even when I have like piles of things on my desk. I mean, I think we can all appreciate the feeling of like, okay, it's my mess, but I know that the bills are in there, and then
right.
if you try and like help to clean it, like now I don't know where the thing is, right? So there's that. So it's interesting, although it seems like awry in their mind, there is some level of organization, or you're saying cataloging of.
Cataloging of it. And
Mm,
so I get that attachment detachment piece. And I will also say that's not a hoarding issue. That's a, hey, I have memories attached to this thing and I don't want to let it go issue. And no, even if you are just, like, say you're trying to just declutter so you can do photos to sell your house, like, still that's a process of
yeah.
determining what you're keeping, what you need, getting it to the point where it does look ready for a photo. But it's a lot of emotional things, especially if you've lived in a space for a long period of time, you
Hmm.
know. And I've had clients where the issue wasn't decluttering. They did all their, like, 95% of their house, but then you get to that one room and you're like, "Hey, this is where the military flag is. This is where my photos are. This is the divorce decree or there's all these things that
Hmm.
emotionally are charged, and it makes it really challenging to know what should I do with, grandma's wedding dress, um, do I keep it?
Yes.
What do I do with it? And so there's those kind of things that emotional piece is very real. And it just is. Like, we all have
Yeah.
attachment to some of our stuff.
So I think this is really important to note because I know that you specifically help serve the people that have loved ones that are hoarders.
Mhm.
But I think this discussion about understanding emotional attachment to things, right, is something that we all need to appreciate, right? Because I can imagine that when somebody is considering having the conversation with their loved one, there's this feeling of like other, right? Like, oh, they have this challenge, this issue, and I don't. And there's like this separatism about it.
Mhm.
But I think there's a huge value in us reflecting upon what it feels like to have to decide, get rid of something that you do have an emotional attachment to. And I think all of us, I mean, moving out of my home and still the stuff that we brought, I'm like, why did I bring this? It's like, but it has a story. It's like, oh, these matchbooks. I remember when I was young and I used to go to all of these, restaurants, and I would collect the matchbooks from all the restaurants. Like,
Mhm.
why do you need a bag of matchbooks? It just doesn't matter. Yeah. But it's the stories around it. And what's interesting is my brother, who is a Marine, he had being deployed all over the place. He was like, I can't have
Right.
a lot of things. So he would tell me how he would take pictures of the things so that he could reflect back on them and he could visually say, oh yeah, I remember, but he didn't actually physically have the thing. I remember he said when he came back from Iraq, there were all these things that he had collected while he was there. And he's like, I can't bring them back with me. So he, slowly took the pictures. But I think what's really important and why I wanted to pause is that um, in sparking this conversation, it's so important to be sensitive to the emotional attachments. And if we could kind of just reflect upon our own feelings about things, and our emotional attachments to things, I think I'm assuming that it would probably make it easier. I'm just yapping, but what do you
Well,
what do you
I
think, Tammy?
well, I would say, semper fi to your brother, and, thank you for serving our
And thank you for
country.
your service as
Well,
well.
thank you. I feel like, and I was talking earlier today with a friend of mine on Clubhouse about this, that joining the military was kind of my move to save myself and,
Mm,
um, escape the chaos. And I find a lot of people in not everyone, but a lot of people had a reason for getting out of their situation, and the military became their way out. And so but I've also had this discussion around that about how you're deployed somewhere and you are someplace, and it's normal to get a t-shirt, a keychain, but how many of those things can you possibly have? And then
mhm,
the photo taking is really a great way to preserve that memory. And in fact, it's a way, if you are deciding to get rid of things that you have and no longer need, that photographing it can be a great way to preserve that memory, and then you can still let the things go. And
mhm,
it's it's valuable to understand that at some point you may not want to haul all that stuff around. You may not want to dust it or look at it or worry about it getting broken. Like, at some point you may decide photos are actually a much more economical way to go, because, and let's face it, in the military you have a limited amount of weight that you can transition. So
exactly.
um it's important to know how to release some of that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was talking a little bit about the conversation, and starting of the conversation, and I just wanted to share with the audience this really great guide that you put together. Those of you that listen to the Rocket Fuel podcast, that every one of our episodes does have a catchword so that our experts can actually provide you with additional value. And Tammy put together this great guide called "Let's Spark the Conversation," and having a really relationship focused, a sensitive conversation with your loved one around their hoarding situation. And so I invite you, I have the doodad right here for those of you watching on video. Just fantastic guide. And I really appreciate, Tammy, that you put this together, because I know that people are going to be inspired by what you say and say, okay, well, I don't know how to start. And hopefully this guide is their way of starting that conversation. So please text RF for Rocket Fuel dash spark to 411-321 to receive Let's Spark the Conversation and other resources that are intended to support loved ones of hoarders, and to for those of you who really want to make a difference, in their lives. And I definitely invite the international audience to text as well. So basically, the number internationally would be +1-909-741-1321. And the message is RF-Spark. RF-Spark. Now, in both cases, we're going to ask you for your email address if you've never texted a catchword before. So make sure you provide that so that you can actually have this instantly emailed to you. It's a fantastic resource. So tell me a little bit more about your journey in working with hoarders, because my understanding is that first you were kind of helping with supporting hoarders and from an organizational perspective, and then you kind of transitioned. So let's go back to when you were actually working with those who needed that help.
So it was interesting because at first I didn't realize how much the support piece was missing for people who discovered loved ones with a hoarding issue. And so at first that wasn't even really something I really thought a whole lot about. And so I had realized that I had some organizational skills, that I'd always had that. And one of my first clients had very long-term health challenges, and she had not let anyone in her house for about a year and a half. And I had like before and after, like she showed me before photos. And because of her health issues, she really lost a lot of mobility and couldn't maintain her home anymore. And I just started to see how much her daughter would have wanted to help, how much her other family members wanted to help, and she wouldn't allow it. And I started to just see, like, even home health or physical therapists, like they would really want to know how to say something, but they really didn't know what to say. But so think I was kind of collecting that data as I was working with my clients who had extreme clutter issues. Like they had some hoarding issues going on. They couldn't navigate to their bathroom. They couldn't use their craft room anymore. And things had just piled up to the point where they couldn't navigate in their homes. And I was not judgmental. Like I feel, and it was evident that I was able to come in and hear their story, listen to what was happening, and then say, okay, we're going to work on this room today. And I would literally create a plan that said, okay, I've heard what you want to do, what your goals are. Like you want to be able to navigate to your craft room in your electric scooter and be able to access all your things. And we would just create a plan around how we're going to do that. And I just kept it very simple: keep, donate, discard, and just kind of started with those as ways to sort. And then it became very physically demanding for me personally, because with mobility and health challenges, people can't get up and move boxes around and look at their space. And they had to really trust and rely on me that I was going to go into, say, the bathroom they couldn't access and assess what's going on. And then I would bring out little bins of their things to sort so they could sort them.
Right.
And in that process, you hear their story. They tell you why they have 900 purses. Okay, I'm exaggerating. 100 is about what I've seen.
Right.
But there's a story, like they went to Disneyland and they were with their grandkid, and that's why they have this purse. And that's why, like, they had matching purses, or there's some kind of really emotional connection, human connection. And if you have to make that connection to make a difference for that person. And it, to me, I started to really see the human aspect of what was really needed. Not, hey, I'm here today, we're throwing everything out.
Yeah, it's like, all right, let's clean this up. Yeah.
And while that might be your reaction and that might actually be what needs to happen, you have to step back and think about, like you mentioned earlier, how would I feel if someone was in my space? How hard is it for me to detach from things? And think about it from that human connecting perspective, which is why so much of this starts with a conversation, a compassionate, kind, how are you today? Tell me what's going on with you before you dive into some problem solving solution situation. And
Mhm.
even now, with some of the uh, ways that I'm supporting people in my life that have health challenges and things like that, it's that human connection when you walk into that space that makes all the difference. And
Mhm.
it needs to be applied in this situation too. And that's why, and then as a support person, as a person, as a parent that hoards, as a person who grew up in that, I have needs too. I need to be supported. My mental health, my mental wellness. If you go somewhere where there's not a bathroom, honestly, where are you going to do that if you're in that space? Bringing
Mhm.
your own water, bringing a chair if you need it, like coming prepared as a person who's ready to assist but not be overbearing and try
Woo!
to, yeah.
That's a huge statement there. I just want to unpack that because I do think it's amazing that your focus became supporting those who intend to support, right? Because they're worthy of it as well. There's a lot. I can just imagine having to disconnect yourself. Let's say as a going into your parents' home, right?
Mhm.
And having an emotional response to this because of one, how it affected you, what does this, how is it a reflection on you if other
Right.
people come in, all these things that are like charging the communication, and how that bringing those emotions into it could really destroy the opportunity to really help them and to change it. And it's almost, I could imagine even reflecting on, well, why is it that you want to change this? Is it for them or is it for you?
Well, and that's a really valid question because there's an expectation that we will assist our parents as they age, right? That's like a
Mhm.
societal, maybe even unwritten expectation. And sometimes that's really hard to do if that person doesn't perceive that they have an issue or they don't want help, or you're mad. Like if you're coming in mad, you are not going to be able to detach from what's going on. You aren't going to, like, you're going to be angry about, maybe if you were raised in it, you're mad about that. If you haven't processed any of your emotions, if you haven't sought counseling or work through your things, it's going to be much more charged to walk into trying to help
Yeah.
someone else. And sometimes we aren't the best person to help our parents. Sometimes that's a really bad idea. Other times you might be all they've got. And
Mm.
if that's as frequently the case, then you have to figure out, how is it possible for me to assist in some way without losing my mind
Mhm.
and without losing the relationship. So you have to kind of navigate and really walk gently, and don't always make it about that hoarding situation. Make it about the fact that you actually care about them, and
Right.
they're that there's room in their fridge for their good food that they got, like, and actually caring and not isolating and not becoming really angry because there's all this stuff in there. But it's very difficult to walk the line sometimes between, what needs to happen, but at the same time you don't want to have a stressful meltdown for them. And that's
Mhm.
where it comes down to really having that conversation about, what do you see as the issue? What do they see as the issue? And ultimately, what is the resolution that would make sense in your situation? Because not
Mhm.
one size fits all. Like, you
Right.
might be
Progress
downsizing.
may not look the same way.
Right.
Like you're like, "Oh, it would be amazing if all of this was gone or whatever," but maybe even being able to chip away. And what I found interesting that you mentioned earlier was just kind of asking what they would like to see. Like you were saying, "Oh, so you would like to be able to navigate into your craft room." Like start looking at their objectives and goals and supporting what they want versus what you want to happen. And
Exactly. And really focus in on that. And a lot of times they are not asked. Like, someone comes in and tells them it's going to be XYZ, but maybe you'd get a little more traction if you were addressing their issues as to why they may want to be, or why they're resisting it. And it's usually a lot of fear around what is going to happen.
Right, right. And I remember you also mentioning when we talked before the episode, you were talking about from a safety perspective, being able to have a certain amount of space, let's say for first responders to come in and such. And I didn't even think of it that way. Could you share with the audience like what the challenges are around that and what they should be aware
So
of?
if you need to be removed from a space for whatever reason by emergency responders, you basically need a 36-inch path. In order for them to get in order for them to get a gurney in and out. And it impacts their safety as well, because, for example, firefighters are trained to go in and pull you out and get you out. But they are not necessarily looking at the fact that now they're going into a hoarded space and there's clutter that could cause an avalanche, which impairs their ability to walk around. When there's a lot of clutter, it burns hotter if there happens to be a fire. And there are just stories of people who could not be rescued from their hoarded space because someone could not get in, or they maybe tried to get in but could not find you. And so I don't share those things necessarily to scare people, but more to take into account what kind of situation could come up if you don't address some of these things in your space. And our first responders can be very negatively impacted by these situations, and they often refer to them as heavy content homes. And it's a way to know what's going on in that space. And honestly, sometimes it becomes a surround and ground situation where they could not go in. They may have wanted to, they may have looked for a way, or someone may make the decision that they aren't going to have their crew go in because
it's unsafe for them.
It's unsafe. And you may or may not have people in that space. And it's part of why I look at this as like a health crisis versus just, oh, it's stuff, because there's so many people that are impacted by these situations. And a lot of times we aren't talking about it because of the shame and the stigma and, oh, someone's going to judge me because I'm letting my parent live a certain way.
Right.
Where they forget that we're, autonomous. We can make those decisions even when they're unsafe or things that we don't agree with. And that's a whole nother topic of why it's so challenging to actually intervene sometimes, because people do have the right to live how they want to, even if you completely disagree with it.
Right. Right. Exactly. So I think that's why, just as you're saying, it's important to really think through what your positioning is going to be in the discussion, to obviously be considerate of how it affects them. I think hearing stories like that, when you had mentioned that, I was thinking I never even thought about that, but it's a piece of information that's valuable, because maybe that's a comfortable way for you to say, you know what, I just listened to this podcast episode. I never really thought about this, but I'm a bit concerned. What if something happens to you? I want somebody to be able to come and help you and get to you. So what do you think, we can do to maybe make that a little bit better? Right. And just kind of chipping away. Obviously not saying what the hell's going to happen if the ambulance needs to come. Like, yeah, probably not going to be a good conversation, but
that's often in our heads. That is exactly what we're thinking. And
yeah, exactly. We're not saying that you can't think that. We're just saying,
then you have to look at that and say, okay, now how can I make this palatable so they won't hang up on me today, So it is a matter of, I think it's important to recognize that you are probably going to have an emotional response. You probably are going to be triggered if you have some sort of anxiety around clutter or things like that. And you walk, I know for me, it's very triggering. Like, okay, this is really hard for me to look at all this stuff and not go into some kind of like, I want to just pitch it all now. And,
Yeah.
but I can feel that way in my own home, not necessarily someone else's.
Oh
So,
gosh, I definitely get it to like, I just need to clean this kitchen. I can't even take it anymore. So this is interesting because at one point when I was reading through this amazing guide that you put together and reflecting upon our conversation, and at one point I thought it's it's kind of like an intervention, right?
mhm.
But I'm going to argue with myself here, if you don't mind. But I'm thinking like the intervention is the big, like, all right, we need to do something about it. It's a little bit more radical. We're going to sit you down and whatever. But the conversation that you're talking about here, if we can have these gradual conversations where we recognize in the back of my mind of our minds, we recognize that there's some sort of trauma that's involved with it. There are emotional connections
Mhm.
that I need, even though I may be angry or whatever, I need to suspend judgment. I need to be kind during this process. All of these things that there may be slow progression, right? And then at a certain point, there may be the decision to say, okay, there really needs to be a serious intervention. You can't let it go that much longer. And that's why I think it's brilliant to be able to have a resource like you to be able to navigate through that process too. Um, it's just, how is it that you help people? Is it one-on-one? Do you meet with families? Are there group programs that you support? How is it that you support these families?
So a lot of it has been some one-on-one consulting, creating a plan to at least start talking about it. Sometimes,
Mm.
other times, I do have a Facebook group where a community where you're welcome to come and join us because there's so many different aspects to this, and so I do the virtual piece quite a bit now, and I am creating a membership site where people would be able to come in and just kind of look at the videos, look at the resources, look at the things that are out there. And you might be able to hone in on, just that one, like, ooh, I want to talk about safety with my mom today. And here's a resource, and here is a couple videos on how to do that, how to just kind of have that conversation. So I see a real need for that part.
And
And
can they find that on the hoardingsolution.com? Can they find those resources?
I have a blog there that does have a lot of resources
Perfect.
that is helpful. I also have a podcast, the Hoarding Solution podcast, and
Mm.
that is there's some times where I'm talking about it just from my perspective, like Tuesdays with Tammi, where it's just kind of free for all when things come up that I see coming up for me and other people. And
Mm.
I also interview guests who are either in this space or like people that are organizers, people that do on some of this on-site work who are trying to navigate it better. And I see a real need for um, people to know that there are options out here and not be alone facing this. And so many people feel like they're the only person, that they're the only parent, one with a parent who has this horrible situation, and it's very isolating to think you're all by yourself. And
Mhm.
so everything I'm doing is geared toward connecting people to feel less alone, but also have resources to be like, I can't hire someone to come clean this, and so my parent or my loved one has agreed, and how do I do that? Like, what
Mm.
supplies do I need? How can I be prepared to assist the best way I can?
It's extremely overwhelming. It's an emotional
Mhm.
overwhelm, and then from a task perspective, what do I address first? How do I address it? And
Mhm.
it's truly a blessing to be able to have a resource like you, Tammi. I just want to commend you so much, and I think that the direction that you went in to think, let me think about this differently, and recognize that the people that want to make that change or facilitate that change with their loved ones, they need that support. This is golden. And so once again, I want to remind you guys as listeners, if you have a friend, a loved one that that is having a extreme clutter, like you said, to hoarding problem, and you want to make a difference, right? You have this feeling in your heart saying, how could I make the difference? I don't know. This is really uncomfortable. I do invite you to text RF-spark to 411321 for this guide on how to spark the conversation with that loved one, right? How to have it be a very relationship focused, a very just empathetic talk,
Yes.
and not actually just one. And I want to clarify that, because you're saying that this is a journey, but it starts with being able to have that initial conversation that does bring up the problem, right?
Right.
So please text RF-spark to 411321. If you're here in the US, please make sure to provide your email address if it asks for it, because that's how we get it in your email inbox. And if you're listening internationally, please text RF-spark or RF-spark, RF-spark, to +1 909 741 1321. That's +1 909 741 1321. That's RF-spark. And you will also need to provide your email address. Any final words on this topic? Tammi, I know that we could talk about it for forever. It's just a lot of fascinating information, and it's so transformational. It could help so many people. So any thoughts or final words?
I look at it as we need to connect with people that can help them transform. And that is how we emerge from these difficult things going on in our lives. And I feel and I know that just that initial connection and really sparking that conversation is very valuable, and you don't have to face it alone, and you are not alone. There are an estimate of 19 million people alone in the USA that have an issue, and there
Wow.
are other countries are as well that have this issue, and people really need to know that they are not alone, and that there are people that are aware and are working on bringing broader awareness to this issue.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tammi. It is evident why you are rocket fuel in people's lives. So I am so grateful that you joined us. And for those of you that are listening to this podcast, I hope you have a rockin' day. Have a good one. Bye.